What makes The Lord of the Rings so amazing? In my opinion, it's Tolkien's love for detail. He did not simply wrote a plot, but created a very detailed world for his epic story as fundament. A lot of characters have long backstories and family members with their own backstories that sometimes go back thousands of years. The lore of Lord of the Rings is massive. The more you know it, the more you see the deep meaning of all those elements in the story, like small gears in a giant clockwork that all work together. With this, the world becomes alive and meaningful, and starts fascinating the reader or the viewer. Of course, besides the books, we also have the films, and in an audio-visual medium like this video, it helps having them. I personally like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, especially the extended cut, and I have a special connection to them. When I was young, I heard a lot about Lord of the Rings, but never came to read it. It was after seeing The Fellowship of the Ring 16 years ago that changed this. And now I'm making far too long lore videos about certain aspects of Tolkien's universe on YouTube. My idea for this new format is now to go through the whole extended edition of The Lord of the Rings and explain all the little lore details and references from the book's perspective many people probably don't know about. I try not to focus too much on the differences towards the books, of which there are plenty, but I will mention some of them too. But I mainly want to explain the lore behind the story. Of course, I can't do this in one video, so for today we start with the prologue of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring in the extended edition. If the feedback is positive, I shall continue this as an episodic series. Don't worry, I will continue making my more classic lore videos, but I like having the option to make shorter videos from time to time, because here I can decide when I end the video, which gives me more flexibility in production, so I hope you like it too. Before we start, a few minor things. Of course, spoiler alert for all books and films. It also helps if you have seen the films or read the books, I guess. I will most likely overlook a few things or even make a few mistakes. Feel free to mention it in the comment section. Maybe I can include it or correct it in the next episode. I try to pronounce names, as in all of my lore videos, as Tolkien described it, or as it makes sense considering a word's origin. That means a lot of rolled R's. I will use the book's lore, including those books the filmmakers had no access to due to right issues. And finally, some of my interpretations could be a bit stretched at places. But let's start. The film starts with a black screen, and Galadriel, played by Cate Blanchett, speaks a prologue. She says some quite interesting things here. Quote, "The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air." We also have this line in the book. Here it can be found pretty close to the end and is said by Treebeard as a farewell to Galadriel and Celeborn. But let's have a look at the phrase itself. Earth or fire, water and air are three very important elements in the lore of the elves. The three legendary gems called the Silmarili, which are most precious to the elves, got lost and ended in the sky as a star, in a fiery pit deep inside the earth, and in the ocean. These gems hold the light of the two divine trees of Valinor that gave light to the world before sun and moon were created and were present when the elves awoke the first time. So you could say those gems represent earth, air and water, the elements of the world. Also, the divine trees later got destroyed, and all that is left of the light of them are those gems, the stars, the moon and the sun. In addition, the next introduced element in the prologue, the three elven rings of power, are also connected to this, because they are called Velia, the ring of air, Narya, the ring of fire, and Nenya, the ring of water. I really like this reference, especially told from the perspective of an elf like Galadriel, who also wears the Ring of Water herself and has seen the two trees of Valinor, probably even the Silmarili, with her own eyes. So to say, she is a contemporary witness. I think the quote fits really well and sets a nice tone for the prologue. This also goes hand in hand with the phrase, "Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it." The prologue was interestingly pretty much the last part of the film that was created, because it was not decided until the very end if there will be a prologue at all. It also had many iterations, and they had to carefully cut out many things, as you will see soon, because there are just too many information and names that would confuse the viewer, a problem that I also often have in my lore videos. And right after this, we see this scene. It implies that the Elven Rings of Power, after their creation, were given to those 3 elves, which is not 100% correct. Sauron taught the Elven Ring maker Celebrimbor and his guild making those 19 Rings of Power, with the elves not knowing it was Sauron. He tricked them with the intent to control and corrupt them with a mastering that he would forge later. But it did not work. When Sauron created the One Ring, the elves were still able to take the rings off their fingers and knew it was Sauron behind all of this. These 3 elves got the 3 Elven Rings because Sauron would now attack the Elven Ring maker Celebrimbor and his realm Eregion. The Elf Lord gave the rings away to hide them from Sauron because they were the most powerful, and they were also created in secret, without the Dark Lord in disguise observing the process. Of course, those 3 elves couldn't wear the ring because Sauron still had the One Ring in the Second Age. Sauron still conquered Eregion and killed Celebrimbor, but he did not under torture reveal where he hid the 3 Elven Rings. However, Sauron got the other 16 or maybe only 15. I will probably mention Celebrimbor again when we come to Moria in another video. However, we later learn about Galadriel having one of the 3 Elven Rings of Power, but who are the other 2 elves? According to the Lord of the Rings book, the Ring of Water was given to Galadriel, the Ring of Air was given to Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor Elves, and the Ring of Fire was given to Círdan, the Shipwright, and Herald of Gil-galad. However, according to the unfinished tales, Gil-galad received 2 rings and gave one, Narya to be precise, to Círdan. However, it makes no real difference in the end. The other herald of Gil-galad should later receive his ring, the Ring of Air. He could have also become the next High King of the Noldor Elves, but he declined. His name is Elrond. Galadriel could also have claimed the throne, but declined too. Or let's say she never tried to claim it. As we see in the end of the trilogy, Gandalf wears Narya. Círdan the Shipwright gave his ring to Gandalf when he arrived in Mithlond, the elven haven in the west, because as one of the few, Círdan understood the nature of Gandalf and the other wizards, or at least knew who they were. He said to Gandalf that he would need Narya more than him, which is like a prophecy that became true, because Narya was said to be able to rekindle the hearts of others in dark times, and this describes Gandalf's work in Middle-earth quite well. What is also interesting, you see Círdan at the beginning of the films and at the end, same with Galadriel and to some degree Elrond too, which is a nice stylistic device. In the next scene we see the 7 Dwarf Lords and their rings. Who exactly they are is hard to say, but it's most likely that they represent the 7 great houses of the dwarves. One of them must be Durin III, who is from the house of Durin, also known as the Longbeards. Interestingly, it is possible that the dwarves received at least Durin's Ring of Power from the elves directly, and not from Sauron, but this can be for sure debated. Thror and Thrain wore it too, but it never got into Thorin Oakenshield's possession. Sauron got it back first, and Thrain, that's Thorin's father, was the last dwarf to wear a Ring of Power. And last, 9 for mortal men doomed to die. These are 9 lords of men. I assume in the middle is the one who will become the Witch King. I also assume to his left is Khamûl, the only other Nazgûl we at least have a name of. He is a lord or maybe even a king of the Easterlings and has the highest rank of the ring race after the Witch King. Beyond that, we don't know anything about his past. At least 3 of the ring race were lords of Númenor. Númenor was an island where Aragorn's ancestors and the Dúnedain, the Westmen, came from. In this context, the ancient kingdom of Númenor was later in its history divided into 2 groups, mainly the Kingsmen, including the king, who much later even would follow Sauron, and in contrast the faithful, who did not and were still faithful in Aman, holding up the friendship to the elves. The faithful were also later oppressed and persecuted by the Kingsmen. Isildur himself lived on Numenor and was the grandson of the second last leader of the faithful, Amandil. Isildur's father Elendil would become the last. Knowing this, it has something special that 3 of the Nazgul were also Dunedain from Numenor, and most likely Kingsmen who got tricked and corrupted by Sauron during the Second Age. The scene where Aragorn helps the hobbits against the Ringwraiths later becomes really powerful in this context, with Aragorn being a descendant of the faithful from Numenor. There's even more to it, but that's for a later video. And this is all we know about the origins of the Nazgul. In this shot we see Mount Doom. It was once created by Sauron's master Morgoth during the First Age. Sauron chose this and Mordor as his dwelling place after his master's defeat at the end of the First Age in the so-called War of Res. What I like about this is that this volcano is a relic of ancient times created by the most evil power in existence. Mount Doom's dark ashes probably gave Mordor, which means Darkland, its name. I think it has something creepy, dark and evil, especially that the One Ring was forged here. What powerful entities must be at work here, considering that Sauron not simply forged a ring here, but the fate or doom of Middle-earth. This is a lore detail you have to understand. Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's lore is a lot about fate, so the power is not necessarily only sheer strength or some kind of magic. It's creating something so unimaginable, powerful and terrible that it actually forges history and events that seem to happen by accident, but actually were meant to be, because they are entangled with the fate created through the existence of this ring. It's quite hard to explain, but Bilbo was meant to find the One Ring. It was his fate. Tolkien loves the idea of turning something seemingly subtle and meaningless or ordinary into something meaningful and world-changing on epic scale. Mythology often works like this. Let's continue. The prologue must now take a few shortcuts, because there is a ton of backstory here. Sauron forged the One Ring Second Age 1600. That's in the middle of the Second Age. But the Battle of the Last Alliance was at the end of the Second Age, so over 1700 years later. A lot of things happen in this time, so much that I also must take some shortcuts to explain it, so I leave out some details. When Sauron betrayed the elves and forged the One Ring, he almost conquered all of Middle-earth. Only when the mentioned very powerful men of Numenor came with huge fleets to help the elven High King Gil-galad, who called them for help, they were able to push Sauron back. However, Sauron was still in a very good position. After that, he tricked Numenor and the island got destroyed. Even the shape of the world was changed. However, Sauron lost his physical form in the process and was never able to take a fair form again. This is a short version. Of course, Sauron can exist without a body, and his spirit returned from the now sunken island of Numenor back to Mordor, where he grew his armies and power again to threaten the new kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, established by the faithful survivors of Numenor. Sauron started to pressure Gondor greatly with his armies. Seeing this, the remaining Noldor elves under High King Gil-galad, the Sylvan elves under Thranduil's father, the dwarves and the men of Arnor under Elendil formed the last alliance of elves and men and came to help and free Gondor. From there, together with Gondor, they started to conquer Mordor to defeat Sauron one and for all. Pretty much all that northwest Middle-earth had to offer attacked Sauron and his realm before he could again regain his full strength. This scene here is, by the way, quite interesting. The land looks a bit like Rohan in the films, but at this time Rohan didn't exist. But around this area there were huge forest-like lands which extended Fangorn. The Endwalfs were active in this region and taught the people who settled there to grow plants. However, to prevent the armies of the Last Alliance to marching through there, Sauron burned down these lands, and so they later became known as the Brown Lands. Here the Endwalfs got lost. We don't see forest here, but something that resembled Rohan, and I think This scene can be later seen in the second film again. The brown lands are close to Rohan and we see fire, so this could be a nice little reference to this, but that is just my very stretched interpretation. I think this scene always sticks out a bit. Of course, it's primarily there to show Sauron's war efforts and cruelty. In this scene we also see some armed men, probably Easterlings, because Sauron allied a lot with them and they fought on Sauron's side. These men also look a bit like Dunlendings. The dead man of Dunharrow, that's the undead army, is related to the Dunlendings and worshipped Sauron at this time. It's not unlikely that Sauron also had Dunlendings to fight for him. The Dunlendings were settling in the area of Gondor first, but were driven out by the Númenóreans when they wanted to settle there, so they had all the reason to hate and fight against Gondor. Then we see a map of the known parts of Middle-earth. What is interesting here, east of Mordor we can read Mountains of the E, that are the mountains of the east. I assume that they are the Orokarni, the Red Mountains. It's close to where the elves awoke in ancient times. Would be interesting to know why it's on the map. Another interesting little detail regarding the map is of the late Third Age and not the second as a story that is told. For example, Minas Tirith is still called Minas Anor at this time. Minas Morgul is still Minas Ithil, and Rohan did not exist for another 2,500 years. But there is a directorial reason for this. Next, we will look at an emblem we can see in the battle. We see some well-known motifs, 7 5-pointed stars, a crown and a white tree. This represents the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor. The stars are for the 7 Palantiri that Elendil and his 2 sons brought with them from Númenor. The tree is the white tree in Gondor, descendant of the white tree Nimloth, also in Númenor. I made a video about those white trees if you are interested. The crown is a symbol of power for Gondor, but a scepter or a big star for Arnor, because there the king wore a jewel on his brow called the Elendilmir and had the scepter of Annúminas. In this scene we see Elrond, which is correct, but Círdan from the beginning fought in this battle as well. It's also important to note that also Thranduil and his Sylvan elves were there too. His father Orofer died before at the Blackgate and so he became king. But also the dwarves were fighting here. A little difference is that the epic main battle was in front of the Blackgate, not at Mount Doom, and called Battle of Dhargoland. After the last alliance won the Battle of Dhargoland, Sauron retreated to his fortress Barad-dûr, and the last alliance besieged it for 7 years. After those 7 years, Sauron came forth and confronted them with his remaining armies close to Mount Doom. I think those events fused here together. What is also interesting is the emblem Elrond wears. It looks different from his own, but could be the emblem of his king Gil-galad, whose herald he was. We can also see it on his shoulder. At first I thought it was Círdan's emblem, which would be an interesting reference because Elrond and Círdan fuse together in the films to some degree. In a later scene we clearly see the banner of Círdan, which is a nice reference because he is a quite important character in the book's lore. He's also part of the White Council. I'm also a bit confused by this banner here. Maybe it's the emblem of Gil-galad, hard to recognize. I first thought it was the emblem of Finwë, Galadriel's grandfather, but that would make no sense. Speaking of the king, we also see the High King of the Noldor elves, Gil-galad, who we also saw at the beginning holding Vilya, the Ring of Air, one of the 3 elven rings of power. He is also the son of Galadriel's cousin. We can see his emblem on his armor and him wielding his legendary spear, which was feared by the enemy and called Aiglos, which means snow point or probably icicle, but it was broken in the fight against Sauron. It's also in the video game Shadow of War as a weapon. Of course, he did not take Vilya with him. He couldn't wear it anyway, because Sauron still had the One Ring. He gave it to Elrond before. And here I have to explain some differences, because this is depicted differently in the films. In the books, Sauron fights Gil-galad and Elendil and kills both of them. When Elendil fell, his sword Narsil broke, but Sauron was thrown down too. So Isildur could cut off his finger with a shard of his father's sword. It's also important to note that Narsil, but also Aeglos, were very special weapons. I would assume a normal sword could not even hurt Sauron at all. Elendil, Isildur and Anarion, that's Isildur's brother, who died earlier during the siege, are also not ordinary men, else they would not have been able to even get close to Sauron's presence. They are from a very powerful bloodline of men, elves and even Ainur, which are those spirit beings like Gandalf or Sauron. Also, Isildur only cuts off Sauron's finger with a ring, not all of them. In Lord of the Rings, it's even later referenced that Sauron is missing a finger by Gollum. Another interesting detail is the visual design of Sauron. Actually, Sauron is not really described in the books visually. We only have a note of Tolkien about his size, which is a bit taller than a human, and that he can take a fair form after the fall of Numenor. So it was horrifying to come close or look at him for most normal beings. Tolkien made this sketch, and it's indicated that Sauron has black skin or appearance, maybe like a shadow. However, the design with the black armor, a crown-like helmet and a black mace is exactly that of Sauron's master, the first Dark Lord Morgoth, who was bent into the void after the First Age. Sauron escaped the defeat of Morgoth and became the new Dark Lord. He, so to say, took his place until his master would return, even though it seems Tolkien later distanced himself from the idea of Morgoth returning. However, Sauron was more like a sorcerer than a warrior, which is reflected in Tolkien's sketch, but I think Morgoth's appearance is more fitting for a Dark Lord and in context of this battle. In this scene, Sauron explodes, which was a cool visual effect. I remember seeing it in the cinema, being impressed in 2001. What happens here is that Sauron, who is a powerful spirit entity like an angel, loses or abandons his body. His spirit now escapes to the far east, hiding there for about 1000 years. In some of Tolkien's notes, it is mentioned that the Blue Wizards tried to find his spirit in the far east, but failed. As a spirit being, he is complete without body, but losing the body and the One Ring weakened Sauron immensely. What is also interesting is that the filmmakers, so to say, use a perspective of the One Ring from now on during the prologue. However, Isildur did not destroy the One Ring and took it as heirloom. In the unfinished tales, it is indicated that Isildur wore the One Ring with a necklace. It is mentioned that Saruman later found the necklace in the river Anduin, but not the One Ring. This also breaks down what happens in the so-called disaster of the Gladden Fields, which actually happened a few years after the war. What is important to note is that in the books, the ambush is a full battle that takes quite some time. In Isildur's company were also all of his sons except for one. He was on his way back to Rivendell to unite with his wife and youngest son. They were ambushed by orcs and fought for days in the Gladden Fields. Isildur thought about escaping, but did not want to leave until his oldest son begged him to. Isildur asked for forgiveness and fled using the One Ring, which transferred his appearance to the unseen realm, so orcs could not see him. When he crossed the river, the ring betrayed him, slipping from his finger and disappearing in the river Anduin. He could not grab it again and had to reach the other side first. There, orcs panicked, seeing him as a dark creature with a glowing red eye in the dark coming out of the water. The glowing came from the Elendilmir on his brow. The orcs shot into the dark with poisoned arrows, killed him and fled in panic. He was never seen again, and because of this, nobody knew what exactly happened to him. The 200-man-strong company was completely murdered by the orcs, except for 3, who miraculously survived to tell parts of the story. 2 of them were sent away early in battle to secure the shards of Narsil. The other was stunned in battle but not slain. Probably Saruman found Isildur's remains much later in this area. I really like the next passage. It hints at so many things happening in the background that are quite complicated to explain in detail, and in a film you don't have time to explain all of this. So indeed, the ring was forgotten. People and Sauron later searched for it but could not find it. Nobody knew where it was, and even Isildur's body could not be found. By accident, Deachol stumbled upon it and his friend Smeagol wanted it, which led to him killing Deachol and becoming Gollum after he was kicked out by his family, because he started to do mean things with it, like stealing and spying, spreading secrets. So he was pretty much an outcast with no place to go. The sun became painful for him, and so he found refuge in a dark cave inside the Misty Mountains, where he lived for centuries, and nobody knew, and all was forgotten over time. I really like the next following lines. Darkness crept back into the forests of the world. Rumor grew of a shadow in the east. Whispers of a nameless fear. If you have seen the Hobbit films or read the books, you know that before Sauron returned to Mordor, he hid for a very long time in the far east and then went to Dol Guldur, which is in the east from the Shire's perspective. Before Sauron hid in Dol Guldur, Mirkwood was known as Greenwood the Great. Sauron hiding there brought evil over it, and so over time it became known as Mirkwood. It was for a very long time unknown what caused the evil there. The rumors about a necromancer spread. I think these lines are referencing exactly this. But there is more, quote, "And the ring of power perceived, its time has now come." What I like about this line a lot is that it introduces a ring as more than just a simple magical ring, but it having a will of its own. The ring is waiting and wants to return to its master. To be precise, the ring is part of Sauron himself. The ring is also Sauron. In addition, Sauron and Saruman actively searched for the One Ring around the Gladden Fields. Saruman actively delayed actions of the White Council against Dol Guldur to give Sauron time to become stronger, so the One Ring would reveal itself to be found by its master. But instead of Sauron, Saruman would be there and find it first. I think the wording of this line is very fitting to hint at what is happening in the background there. Also, in this part we see a young Bilbo Baggins finding the One Ring, which is part of the Hobbit book. Showing this is so important because it is without a doubt the most important event of the whole Third Age, which is over 3,000 years long. I always get goosebumps seeing this scene because of its significance in the history of Middle-earth. It's so powerful and feels like it happened by accident, but definitely powers able to forge the fate of the world itself are at work here, and Bilbo becomes part of it right here. And then we see the map again and the camera zooms out, which is the reason why it's a Third Age map. It gives us a good overview of the epic adventurous places and the world whose fortune will be shaped by the events to come. Thank you for watching. And this was a prologue of Lord of the Rings in the extended edition. It is quite dense and the filmmakers had to cut out a lot of information to make it not too confusing and overwhelming for the viewer. And I think they have done a great job with it, with many interesting details hinted and referenced. As always, this got almost twice as long as I planned it, but the pilot episode is often longer. For future videos I aim for 15 minutes. I hope you enjoyed it, and if I have missed something or did a mistake, please let me know. I could include it in the next episode. Not sure when the next episode will come. It also depends on the feedback, so let me know in the comments how you liked this. Speaking of likes, please feel free to like the video if you enjoyed it too. Commenting and likes help a lot these days on YouTube. The next video could be a little analytic Sea of Thieves review. Lore video wise, I'm not sure if I do a normal lore video or if the feedback and views are good for this one, make a second episode for this format next. A Círdan video is on my mind for quite some time now, but I haven't decided yet. So again, thank you for watching and goodbye.